Why do so many people over the age of 70 gradually start to disappear from their usual social circles? This phenomenon isn't always explained by simple grievances, feelings of loneliness, or disappointment. Often, its root lies in a much deeper internal realization, a kind of quiet, personal awakening that fundamentally shifts how they choose to spend their time. Many at this age begin to notice that their former desire for frequent visits and active socializing with others gradually fades. If these feelings resonate with you, know that you are not alone, and your feelings are by no means mistaken. On the contrary, there is a special wisdom behind this, which, unfortunately, is rarely spoken aloud. In this article, we will explore 6 significant reasons why many older adults over 70 begin to reduce their visits and social outings. We won't be discussing superficial factors like physical convenience or health conditions. These reasons are far deeper, touching upon fundamental shifts in worldview. They explain why withdrawing from usual social contacts should not be seen as a sign of decline or isolation, but rather as evidence of personal growth, the attainment of inner clarity, and a pursuit of genuine peace of mind instead of constant pretense. The point is not to completely turn away from people, but to finally pay attention to one's own inner needs and desires. Thus, if you have ever caught yourself thinking, "I just don't feel like going anymore," reading this will not only help you understand the true reasons behind your feelings, but perhaps even feel a genuine sense of pride for them. The first, and arguably one of the most significant, reasons is the establishment of clear emotional boundaries. After reaching 70, many people are surprised to discover the immense emotional toll certain social interactions demand. While physical fatigue after an active outing is predictable, psychological exhaustion often creeps in unnoticed and proves far more insidious. Conversations that once seemed light and effortless now feel like a heavy burden. The need to listen to endless complaints, delve into others' dramas, or tolerate monotonous chatter, all while feeling no interest in one's own well-being, leads to deep psychological depletion. One returns from such encounters not inspired and energized, but utterly exhausted. With time comes the realization that not every interaction benefits one's emotional state. While others often attribute this withdrawal to age-related changes or health issues, the truth is that individuals simply become far more selective about where they are willing to invest their emotional energy and a part of their soul. Establishing emotional boundaries ceases to be an act of selfishness. It becomes a vital act of self-preservation. Older adults are no longer willing to sacrifice their inner peace and harmony for the sake of formal niceties or conforming to others' expectations. This transformation is not a sign of decline, but clear evidence of profound psychological growth and maturity. In youth, society trains us to be agreeable, to strive to please others, to be extremely polite, and to attend events even when we have no desire to. However, age bestows the wisdom to gradually unlearn these imposed patterns. It clearly demonstrates that protecting one's inner space is not rudeness, but conscious self-care. This is especially true for those who, for decades, prioritize the needs of others above their own. A moment arrives when it becomes vitally necessary to respect one's own needs as well. As an illustration, consider Pavel, 82, living in Nizhny Novgorod. He used to regularly visit his brother every other Sunday, but over time, he noticed that each visit inevitably devolved into conflict. Their conversations often turned into heated arguments about politics or painful memories of old family grievances. Pavel would return home in a state of deep anxiety and anger, needing several hours to regain his emotional balance. One day, he simply stopped going. His brother, of course, didn't understand the reasons for this decision. But Pavel realized the main thing. Inner peace is far more valuable than blindly following habit. The fact that someone is a blood relative by no means guarantees their beneficial impact on your mental well-being. Establishing emotional boundaries also includes the ability to recognize when an encounter has ceased to be reciprocal and equally valuable. There's a huge difference between feeling needed and simply feeling that something is expected of you. Haven't you felt that sensation when the person you're with is constantly distracted by their phone or seems to be miles away in thought? That feeling of being tolerated rather than genuinely valued becomes absolutely unbearable to ignore with age. And instead of expending energy on maintaining one-sided relationships, one begins to cherish their time and energy for those who truly inspire and enrich them. This isn't about breaking ties or holding grudges. It's about deep respect for one's own well-being, much like one cares for a sore back or tired feet. After all, no one would walk 5 miles on a sprained ankle. So why should one engage in a conversation that twists the soul inside out? Sometimes, the greatest gift one can give oneself after 70 is the permission to no longer appear in places that have ceased to be a source of comfort and warmth, no longer a true home for the soul. The second significant reason explaining the shift in social habits is a profound reevaluation of the value of time. One of the greatest wisdoms that comes with age is the realization that time is no longer an infinite resource that can be squandered thoughtlessly. In youth, one might unhesitatingly spend entire days at large family gatherings or hours in empty conversations with neighbors out of simple politeness, naively believing that an eternity lay ahead. However, after 70, something fundamentally changes. Time ceases to feel boundless. It becomes a rare, incredibly precious, and deeply personal asset. This means that every moment one chooses to dedicate to another must be truly valuable, not in a material sense, but in a deep emotional and spiritual one. This is not a manifestation of selfishness, but rather an act of deep respect for oneself and one's own life. For now, every hour spent in someone else's company is an hour not spent on necessary recovery, on proper rest, or on activities that genuinely bring joy and satisfaction. With age comes a clear understanding. There's a limited number of mornings left to quietly enjoy a cup of coffee, a limited number of walks under the gentle sun, a limited number of books to read, or songs to hum. And this realization is not a cause for sadness. On the contrary, it becomes a powerful source of inner strength. This is precisely why many older adults stop visiting, not out of resentment or disappointment, but because they have deeply recalibrated their relationship with time. Now, it is reserved for what fills life with meaning and energy, not for what drains it. For deep, sincere encounters, not for endless, repetitive small talk. For realizing one's own, even the most modest and simple dreams, not for constantly adjusting to others' plans. As an example, consider Ludmila, 76, from the Kostromar region. For many years, she made a monthly trip to visit her cousin. 3 hours one way, 3 hours back. They chatted, ate, and watched the same TV shows. But over time, Ludmila noticed that these meetings no longer brought her the joy they once did. They weren't bad, but they weren't truly vibrant, and 6 hours of travel began to seem too high a price for such interaction. One day, Ludmila resolutely told herself, "I'd rather spend this time by the lake with a notebook and pencil." And she did. And you know what? She felt an incredible lightness and revitalization. This is a special form of maturity, rarely discussed. The ability to say no, thank you, without feeling guilty. One is not being rude. One is simply cherishing the precious time that remains. It's akin to creating a painting of your own life, where you carefully select the colors and moments that resonate with you, and resolutely decline those that no longer contribute to your inner peace. The third, and one of the most serious, reasons why older adults over 70 reduce their visits is the high emotional cost they have to pay for these social interactions. It's not that one becomes unsociable. Rather, one becomes emotionally honest with oneself. In youth, one could tolerate empty chatter, gossip, or even the subtle power play some people engage in. However, now the tolerance for so-called emotional junk has simply run out. And this is not a flaw. On the contrary, it's a sign of maturity. At this stage of life, many begin to notice that after some meetings, nothing remains but deep fatigue. And it's not even about open conflicts. Instead, It is precisely the emptiness and meaninglessness of the interaction that become the most draining. One listens as people talk about things that no longer interest them. They nod, participate in conversations that seem repetitive, superficial, or disconnected from who they've become. And they leave not with a feeling of lightness, but with a sense of utter depletion. This kind of emotional fatigue often remains misunderstood by others. They might mistakenly believe that one has become aloof or lost their spark, but in reality, they have simply outgrown the need to play roles and conform to external expectations. They no longer feel obligated to explain themselves or justify their silence. All their life, they showed up, smiled, and behaved as they should, but now they choose inner peace over outward conformity. From a psychological perspective, this phenomenon is often described as the theory of emotional selectivity. With age, one becomes more discerning in their interactions, seeking depth and meaning over quantity of contacts. They consciously decline interactions that feel obligatory, superficial, or emotionally empty. One begins to value the depth of connection far more than the frequency of meetings. And they come to understand. Sometimes solitude nourishes the soul more than strained and meaningless interaction. As an example, consider the story of Gennady, 74, from Yaroslavl. He used to visit distant relatives every week. Even at these gatherings, he often felt invisible. No one really asked how he was doing. No one truly listened. Everyone was preoccupied with themselves, discussing their purchases, vacations, and achievements. And then one day, Gennady simply stopped going, not out of resentment, but out of deep self-respect. Now he spends that time in his garden, reading books, or taking a walk with a close friend who truly sees and hears him. And he has never felt more emotionally stable and harmonious than he does now. If you have ever felt not just tired, but emotionally depleted after an interaction, this is a signal of inner wisdom. It tells you, you don't have to keep giving pieces of yourself to those who don't value them. And once you hear that signal, it becomes impossible to ignore it going forward. You will understand. Choosing inner peace over playing a social game is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of survival, a testament to maturity, that very wisdom that only comes with age. The fourth important reason is decreased physical energy. No one really warns you about what happens to the body after 70. Any outing, even the simplest, begins to feel like a multi-hour expedition. One might start the day in a good mood, get dressed, bring a small gift or dessert, and leave the house, but by the time they return, it feels as if they've just conquered a tall mountain. This decline in stamina is not a sign of weakness. It's the body's natural way of saying, respect me. After 70, energy becomes a limited and extremely valuable resource. You start to notice this not only in how much you can accomplish, but also in how long it takes to recover. A 2-hour visit can cost you the rest of the day or even the next. However, those around you don't see this. They might say, you hardly ever show up anymore. But they don't realize how much effort it takes just to show up anywhere. Behind every refusal to visit is a quiet internal calculation. Can your body handle this or not? There's an increasingly clear realization. You have little time and energy left to spend on discomfort. Sitting on stiff chairs, forcing smiles through long conversations, eating food that makes you feel unwell afterward, climbing stairs with shaky knees. At 40 or 50, these things didn't matter. But now they do, and significantly so. And instead of pushing yourself for others, you begin to choose rest over effort, comfort over obligation. From a psychological perspective, this phenomenon is called embodied wisdom. It's the idea that the body possesses its own form of intelligence. It knows when enough is enough. It sends clear signals. Your energy is valuable. It needs to be conserved, not squandered on things that bring neither joy nor benefit. And for many older adults, respecting this bodily wisdom becomes a new form of self-love. Consider Ververa, 78, from the Pskov region. She used to go to weekly meetings with friends, but lately, even the act of driving, parking, walking from the car to the cafe, and then sitting on a wobbly bench left her in pain for several hours. When she finally decided not to go anymore, her friends were surprised. One even said, "But we miss you." And Varvara calmly replied, "I miss myself too, especially when I overexert myself." The truth is, declining a meeting doesn't mean you've stopped loving people. It means you've started listening. Listening to what your body needs. Listening to that quiet fatigue that accumulates when you expend too much social energy. You're no longer fueled by the same energy as before, and pretending otherwise leads to burnout. Choosing fewer outings, shorter visits, or simply staying home is not laziness. It is wisdom in action. The fifth reason is what's called emotional economy. Something amazing happens with age. One truly begins to understand the value of their emotional energy. Just as you wouldn't squander money on things that give you nothing, you stop spending your feelings on people and situations that leave you drained, irritated, or overlooked. This is what's known as emotional economy. And it's one of the most liberating truths rarely discussed when it comes to aging. For decades, you might have tolerated someone's behavior, forgiven grievances too quickly, tried to maintain peace at your own expense, smiled through hurtful words, held your tongue to avoid arguments, and attended family gatherings even when you were tired or felt disrespected. Why? Because you believe your role was to be agreeable, to maintain relationships, to avoid tension. But after 70, that mask begins to fall, and there is deep wisdom in this. You realize your emotional battery doesn't recharge as quickly. Negativity lingers longer, stress hits harder. And most importantly, you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. And this clarity empowers you to say, "I don't need this in my life anymore." Whether it's a friend who constantly criticizes, a sibling who drains your soul, or a neighbor who only calls to complain, you begin to choose peace over politeness. This doesn't mean you've become cold or indifferent. On the contrary, you start to invest more deeply in those who bring warmth, support, and mutual respect. You stop chasing after those who don't call back. Stop explaining yourself to those who never understood you. You begin to treat your emotional world like a garden. You weed out the joy so that happiness can grow. Take Vyacheslav, 82, for example. He used to call his son every Sunday, although the conversations always ended in tension. His son never asked how he was doing, was always in a hurry, and made snide remarks about his life choices. Eventually, Vyacheslav said, "This isn't love, it's an obligation," and he stopped calling, not to punish, but to preserve himself. Gradually, he noticed he became calmer. He began to invest that same energy in conversations with a kind neighbor, with whom they spent long hours solving crosswords and enjoying jazz music. This is emotional economy in action. At this stage of life, one begins to understand they have not only the right, but even the obligation to safeguard their inner well-being. They have earned the right to protect their peace without apology. They don't need to participate in every conflict they're invited to. They don't need to chase anyone's affection or convince anyone of their worth. They already know who they are, what they can give, and what they will no longer tolerate. This is the emotional wisdom that young people rarely understand, but which becomes crystal clear after 70. One stops expending energy on those who bring only chaos into their life. And in this quiet, in this calm, they rediscover parts of themselves that were buried under years of emotional debt. They finally breathe fully, without guilt, without drama, without unnecessary noise. And this is not selfishness, it is survival. The sixth, and perhaps deepest, reason is the awakening of self-respect. There comes a moment in mature age when one stops seeking permission to value themselves. And when that moment arrives, something fundamentally shifts inside. The need to please everyone disappears. The fear of disappointing someone dissolves. Instead, a deep instinct awakens, the instinct to protect one's dignity. I call this the awakening of self-respect. It doesn't arrive with fanfare and grand declarations. It comes quietly, most often after another instance when one was overlooked, undervalued, or misunderstood. But once it arrives, it forever changes how one shows up in the world. In youth, it's easy to confuse kindness with compliance. One tries to help everyone, to please, to smooth over rough edges. They diminish their needs to make more room for others. They downplay their achievements so no one feels worse. They say yes when inside they're screaming no, because the price of someone else's disappointment seems too high. But after 70, the price of self-betrayal begins to seem even higher, and one starts to choose differently. They decline invitations that feel like a burdensome obligation. They stop expending energy on those who treat them as a backup option. They exit conversations that drain their soul. They no longer lower their standards just to be accepted, because a simple but powerful realization comes from within. Peace is more important than popularity. Older adults possess a unique, quiet strength. It's evident in their gait, their speech, the way they look into your eyes. This isn't arrogance. It's earned self-respect. It's the result of decades spent feeling undervalued, in silent patience, waiting for the command to be modest. It's an inner voice that says, I've lived long enough to know what I'm worth. And with this knowledge, one begins to set boundaries not out of anger, but from deep self-love. Take Marina, 76, for example. All her life, she was the one people called when they needed a favor, babysitting, a party organized, or money lent. She did all of this often at the expense of her health. But a year ago, Marina decided differently. She politely declined to participate in another large family event and instead spent a quiet weekend alone by the lake. Her daughter was surprised. Mom, everyone is counting on you. To which Marina calmly replied, and for the first time, I'm counting on myself. This decision didn't just change her weekend. It transformed her entire family dynamic. Her relatives learned to respect her space, and she learned to respect her own needs. This awakening of self-respect isn't about isolating yourself from people. It's about showing others how to treat you by how you treat yourself. When you stop begging for crumbs of attention, people either rise to your level or fall away. And either way, you win because you're no longer waiting for validation of your worth from others. You already stand on that value. Concluding thoughts. If you are over 70 and increasingly find yourself pulling away from routine visits, preferring quiet over empty conversations, or noticing that your social circle has significantly shrunk, I want to tell you something very important. You are perfectly fine. You're not giving up. You're not alone. In fact, without even realizing it, you're stepping into a wiser and more authentic version of yourself. Aging, for all its challenging nature, is one of life's most clarifying experiences. It strips away the unnecessary, the noise, the rush, the imposed shoulds and musts. It helps you see more clearly and feel more deeply. It shows you what truly matters and what never did. And part of this insight is this. Not all relationships are meant to be eternal. Not every invitation must be accepted, and not every version of you needs to remain the same. You are evolving, and sometimes this evolution means stepping away from people, places, or habits that no longer support your inner peace. It means guarding your energy as sacred, because it is sacred. It means choosing depth over drama, sincerity over feigned agreement, truth over empty traditions. And while this path, full of inner discoveries, may sometimes be perceived as solitude, in reality, it is a period when one's true essence begins to manifest in its full authenticity. Thus, if you have reduced the frequency of your visits, do not succumb to the guilt that might suggest you've become selfish. On the contrary, you have simply become more discerning in your social contacts. If you increasingly prefer quiet morning hours over crowded and noisy gatherings, this by no means indicates alienation from the world. It merely suggests that you have begun to listen to the deeper needs of your soul, to its inner rhythm. And if those around you are unable to grasp this change, there is nothing tragic in that. Not everyone is meant to be a companion on this path to ultimate wisdom. You have rightfully earned this inner peace. You have gained the full right to prioritize your needs. You have reached that degree of maturity which allows you to realize, stepping back from conventional norms is not equivalent to surrender. It means aging with grace and dignity.